Good morning. Hey, open your Bibles to Luke chapter 8 if you've got them. We'll be there in just a minute. So we're going to be talking about Christ's authority over nature and really more than just over nature, but just continuing in this series of looking at the authority that Christ has over everything. But I wanted to start before summer, my family we take a beach vacation if we can, and so, back in May, we went to the beach, and I was out, me and my middle girl and my niece, we were out just catching waves, and it was great. Like, the first day we were there, the beaches are actually closed, like double red flag, and the next day it was open, but it was still pretty rough, which was great for just catching waves and riding them in, and so we're out there, and at one point we were just kind of resting and waiting, and I was talking to them about Leviathan, and which was a lot of fun because neither one of them had really ever heard about Leviathan, and so they were starting to get a little freaked out. Do y'all know what I'm talking about when I say Leviathan? You know who that is in the Bible? What's Leviathan? Sea dragon. So a lot of you didn't know. Raise your hand if you didn't know about the sea dragon in the Bible. Okay, almost everybody. Let me ask you this question. How many of you believe that dragons existed on this planet? All right, let's go. Don't be ashamed. Do not be ashamed. Yeah, a lot. That's good. Y'all know that dragons existed, like not legend, not myth, but like some dragons that flew and lived in the mountains, some dragons that lived in swampy areas, and some dragons in the sea. Did y'all know this? It's not myth, it's not legend, like for real creatures. And what seals the deal for me, aside from all the historians that talk about them and that you got drawings and stories from China all the way to the Americas, besides all that, you know what talks about dragons? The Bible. Some of you don't believe me. All right, Job 41. Job 41, I'm going to read a section. So what's going on in Job 41? You're like, how does this have anything to do with the message? It might not. I don't know, but we're talking about dragons. In Job 41, God is talking to Job, and he's telling him, all these things that you're worried about, everything that you would fear, I'm greater than those things. You cannot compare me, the Creator, to anything in creation. God has all power, all authority, and he's showing, he's proving, he's teaching Job who he is. And so he uses this creature that he calls Leviathan. He's like, hey, take Leviathan, for example. And he starts talking about this creature that can't be tamed, can't be caught, and can't be killed. And he's like, it's invincible for you, for humans. I'll pick up here in verse 12. He says this, God says this. He says, I want to emphasize Leviathan's limbs and its enormous strength and graceful form. Who can strip off its hide? Who can penetrate its double layer of armor? Who could pry open its jaws? For its teeth are terrible. The scales on its back are like rows of shields, tightly sealed together. They are so close together that no air can get between them. Each scale sticks tight to the next. They are interlocked and cannot be penetrated. All right, so pretty awesome creature, but you're like, not convinced. Oh, but verse 18. When it sneezes, it flashes light. Its eyes are like the red of dawn. Lightning leaps from its mouth. Flames of fire flash out. Smoke streams from its nostrils like steam from a pot heated over burning rushes. Its breath would kindle coals, for flames shoot from its mouth. Dragon. That's a dragon. It's a dinosaur that breathed fire and lived in the sea. You know what that is? Awesome. That's awesome. Some of you are like, I don't know if I believe that. Okay, even if you don't, look at me. It is more fun to believe that dragons existed than not. And some of you are just in, thank you. Let's go. 4th of July. And and sometimes I think we're just intimidated. We're like, we're Christians. We don't want the world to think we're weird. They already think we're weird. Yeah, they're going to think we're weird. They're not going to, the world is never going to like us. And who are we intimidated by? Like, are you worried about people thinking that you're stupid when they believe that everything came from nothing? When they believe that one creature turned into a completely different creature over millions of years with no evidence in the middle? Like, we don't need to be intimidated. The Bible is talking about dragons. It's awesome. And here's the point. Because God is saying to Job, like, this is a creature that you can't defeat. You can't tame it. You can't catch it. You can't kill it. He's like, but I own it. I made that creature. I have power and authority over it. He's like, sure, that is the literal king of the beast, but I'm its master. Listen to this passage from Isaiah 27:1. It says this: In that day, the Lord, with his hard and great and strong sword, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent. Leviathan, the twisting serpent. He, Yahweh, God, will slay the dragon that is in the sea. And what ends up happening in the Bible is God uses the picture of the sea dragon as like a metaphor for guess who? Satan, right? In the Bible, in the Old Testament, all the way through to the end, the last book of the Bible, Revelation, Satan becomes the dragon. And it's that same picture. It's like, yeah, Satan is an enemy that you can't defeat, that I can't defeat, that we have no power against, but God made him. And God absolutely will destroy him. And we already know this. Man, we have three great enemies. You know this? As human beings, and especially as Christians, we have three great enemies: Satan, the world, and our flesh. The first night, we already saw how Jesus has authority over the flesh, right? He's one of us. He was made just like us. He's a real human being who took on flesh. He's God who became human, and he was tempted in every way like you and I are tempted, but he never yielded himself to sin. He's victorious over the weakness of our flesh, and you and I as Christians can walk in that victory over our flesh. And Satan's our great enemy. And he's already told us, he's promised, like, he is going to slay the dragon. He is going to kill the great dragon. And we know, like, and we'll see this tomorrow morning, at the cross, Jesus deals the death blow to Satan. Sure, Satan's going to strike his heel, but Jesus is going to crush his head, just like that passage we just read. And so Satan takes on this form of, like, yeah, he's this enemy that we can't defeat. But that's all right, because Jesus absolutely has power and authority over him, and we get to live in that. We get to walk in the victory that Jesus has already won. But that's not our last enemy. What was the last one? Do you remember? We got our flesh, ourselves. We got Satan, and what else? The world. The world. And there's this weird dynamic, right? Because as Christians, we're called to love the world. How do we love the world? With the gospel. By taking the gospel to the world. But the reality is, this world, under the curse of sin, is rebellious. It hates God, and it's going to hate anybody who tries to follow Jesus. Jesus promised us that, right? If the world hates me, it will love you and think you're great and be super kind to you and listen to your opinions with respect. Wrong, right? What did Jesus say? If the world hates me, it's going to hate you. Well, that stinks, because that's where we live, right? And it's this picture, and same thing in the Old Testament, God uses a metaphor to help us understand, like, it's this idea, like, when he looks down on the world, it's rebellious. It's in rebellion to him. It hates him. It's chaotic with sin of all kinds. And God paints this picture that when he looks down the world, he says, it's like a sea that's always being tossed. The waves are roaring. The wind is blowing. It's this chaotic scene. And that's where we live. That's one of our enemies, is we live in a world that is chaotic, it's rebellious, and at times it just seems like, man, we will be overwhelmed by it. And not just like out in the world, but man, we know that in our own hearts and minds, right? There's times where I don't have to look at the world and the chaos that's going on out there. I can look at myself and go, yeah, man, I deal with fear and doubt and anxiety. Like, I deal with my own mess, my own sin. I deal with the sin that's been committed against me and relationships that are difficult and trials that I'm going through. Like, everything can just seem chaotic and out of control. And so who brings peace here? Listen to this from Psalm 65:7. Talking about Yahweh, talking about God, it says this: You quieted the raging oceans with their pounding waves, and silenced the shouting of the nations. Job 9:8. He alone, God alone, has spread out the heavens and marches on the waves of the sea. This is picture that, yeah, the chaos, the rebellion, the craziness of this world. And it's like the ocean when it's storming, when there's hurricanes and tsunamis and all that mess going on, and that would overwhelm us. And he says, oh, absolutely, God can quiet that. God can calm that. Yahweh, God, can trample on the waves of the water. He can rise above it all. And Jesus wants us to see and to learn that lesson. So let's look at Luke chapter 8. Familiar story, but maybe see it through a slightly different lens. Luke chapter 8. This is earlier on in Jesus' ministry. We're going to look at two stories that involve the sea and Jesus. This is the first one that happens. It says this: One day, Jesus, got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side of the lake." So Luke here calls it a lake. Most places in the Gospels, what he's referring to is the Sea of Galilee. It's the same sea where we see the boys fishing and all the different stuff happens, same place. Let us go across to the other side of the lake. So they set out, and as they sailed, Jesus, fell asleep. And a windstorm came down on the lake, and they were filling with water and were in danger. And they went and woke him, saying, "Master, Master, we are perishing." And he awoke and rebuked the wind and the raging waves, and they ceased, and there was a calm. And he said to them, "Where is your faith?" And they were afraid, and they marveled, saying to one another, "Who then is this that he commands even winds and water, and they obey him?" So in the Sea of Galilee, the Sea of Galilee is actually like one of the lowest lakes on the planet. It's like 800 feet below sea level. And it's crazy the way that it's situated, because it's really surrounded on three sides by mountains that have, relative to how low the lake is, pretty high peaks and pretty steep in most places. And then on the fourth side is this, it goes up to a plateau. And what still happens to this day, and the time of year that this story takes place, is that closer to wintertime, and that these storms, these windstorms, would come across that plateau, and then where it says the wind went down to the lake, literally goes way down. It rushes down that plateau and down the bank all the way to the lake, to the Sea of Galilee, and the winds are so fierce, it immediately ignites that sea into chaos, where there's giant waves. And that again, you can go online. I went online and looked at these crazy videos of huge storms on that sea. And so these boys are going across. Jesus is asleep. He's exhausted from ministry. He's sleeping in the boat. And so for these guys who are professional fishermen, they're just taking the boat to the other side of the lake. And it's not a giant lake. It's not huge. But the storm catches them, and they are fighting for their lives. They're doing everything they can to stay afloat, to not capsize. They're bailing out water. They're trying to harness the wind, but at this point, they're just trying to survive. and they get to the point where their skill is tapped. They're out. They realize this storm is overwhelming us. We have no power here, and they wake up Jesus. And Jesus stands up and just speaks a word, right? Peace. He just stands up and says, shh. And immediately the wind stops. And immediately the waves calm. Now that's crazy. We've all been outside where the wind just all of a sudden is gone. But when the lake or the sea is tossed like that, when it's stirred up by the wind, it takes a long time to calm back down. But not when Jesus speaks. When Jesus speaks, it calms immediately. And do you see the boys, like all the guys, like I picture them on their knees and hands, panting, because they've been battling the storm. They're soaking wet, and now they're just staring up at Jesus into a clear night. And what's the question they ask? Who is this? Who even is this man? Because they know the passage we read a minute ago. Who speaks to the wind and the waves and they obey? God alone. God alone. And now they're looking at Jesus and they're going, who is this? And he says, Jesus calls him out. He's like, where's your faith? Where's your faith? I'll pause there. Similar story. Matthew 14. Y'all with me? Matthew 14. This is a little later in Jesus' ministry. This is after he's fed the 5,000, which is really probably like 20,000. It says this, verse 22, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, that's between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So similar situation, except for this time, Jesus sends them across, and he stays up on the mountain to pray. He spends time with the Father. And well, let me ask you this question. Y'all answer out loud. Does Jesus know the storm is coming? Does Jesus know the storm is coming? Absolutely. He's God. He made it, right? And so he goes up to pray, and he sends the boys by themselves into the middle of the storm. And from the other accounts we know, they fight this storm for maybe 9 hours. They're just stuck out in the middle of the sea. And again, they're exhausted. They think, man, we're going to die. We're not making it to shore. And this time it seems like Jesus is nowhere to be found. It seems like they're on their own. I'm saying seems on purpose, right? It seems like they're on their own. What do you think? Who do you think Jesus has been up there praying for? What do you think he's doing? He comes down the mountain. He knows right where they are, and he walks on the sea. Remember that passage we read for the Old Testament? Who marches on the sea? God alone, Yahweh. And he's walking out on the sea to them. And of course, they're terrified, right? Which I try to picture this. When we were on that same beach trip, me and my oldest daughter, That first night when the waves were crazy, we were just walking down the shore, and I said, okay, pause right here. And it was almost not, it was, sun was setting, and so we're walking out there. You couldn't even really see the sunset. It was just dark and stormy. And we're standing there. I was like, okay, I want you to picture, like, these waves are rolling in, and I want you to imagine, like, as the waves are rolling in and one crashes, you think you see something on top of the water, and you stared at that point, but before your brain can even comprehend what you saw, another wave has already eclipsed that image. And that just keeps happening and keeps happening. But for them, so they're looking out, and they think they see something, wave crashes, and one of them says something like, something's on the water. Where? And they're pointing, and they can't see, and then the wave crashes, and they're like, oh, there's something definitely there, but it's far off. And they keep looking, and every wave that crashes, it's getting closer and closer and closer to finally, they're like, it looks like a human, but humans don't walk on water, so what do they think? It's a ghost. They're freaking out. They're like, it's the angel of death. He's coming for us. This is where we die. They start saying their goodbyes to each other, like they're freaking out until Jesus speaks, and they hear their master's voice, and he says, don't worry, like, take courage. It's me. And I love Peter in this moment, right? Lord, if it's you, call me out. And he's like, come on. And Peter gets out of the boat and walks on the surface of the water until what? It says until he sees the wind. Do you see wind? I don't see wind. You see the effects of the wind, right? He's looking around at the circumstances, and what does he think? I shouldn't be doing this. I can relate. That's crazy. He's walking on water. But then it says this. It says he begins to sink. Have any of y'all ever jumped out of a boat, like at the lake? Me too. Did you begin to sink, or did you just plunge? Like, who begins to sink in water? Nobody. Like, what's going on? This is part of the miracle. Like, Peter shouldn't have time to yell. He shouldn't have time to call out on Jesus, but Jesus is still holding him. He's still sustaining his faith. And as Peter begins to sink, he calls out on Jesus to rescue him, and he does. And all of a sudden, they're back in the boat. And the other gospel accounts actually tell us as soon as he gets in the boat is at the shore. Do you remember last time? He says, man, where's your faith? And what they're thinking is, who is this? Who even is this man? What happens this time? He says to Peter, oh, you of little faith, why'd you doubt? Why'd you take your eyes off me? Why'd you stop trusting me? Why'd you look at your circumstances instead of me? But this time, what do the disciples say? Did you see it? I'll read it again. Verse 32, and when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. Why? It's confirmed now. They knew the other passage, only God can calm the winds and the wave with his word. But now they're thinking of the other passage that says, only Yahweh can march on the ocean. Only God tramples the waves, and they've just watched Jesus do that. So what's going on here? What's the main point? Jesus knew the storm was coming. He knew it both times, the time he fell asleep and the time he stayed up on the mountain. He puts them in the middle of the lake on purpose so they would experience the storm. Why? So they could learn who he is. So they would see Jesus for who he really is, and so they would trust him more. The picture is this. Yeah, is this world chaotic? Is this world an absolute rebellion against God? Do you see the effects of sin in this world? Absolutely. Do you feel it in your own soul? Yeah. Why does God allow us to go through this stuff? Why doesn't he just calm it all eternally right now? Why does he put us in the middle of the storm? Same reason. When you look at the situations that you go through in your life and you're like, God, if you love me and if you are good, why would you let this happen? Why would you let me experience this? Why did my dad leave? Why did my mom abandon us? Why'd you allow that person to do that to me? Like, why are my friends turning their backs on me? Why did he break up with it? Like, over and over and over and over again, like, why? And God's saying, shh, peace, be still. Look to me, trust me, walk with me. He has authority and power over everything in your life. Everything that to you would seem chaotic and broken and in disorder, he can bring peace. He has authority and power over it. All the trials, all the temptations that you'll face. He has so much authority over it that he's actually using the things in your life that seem evil and broken. He's actually using those things to grow you. He's doing something much more important than rescuing you from the moment. He's opening your eyes to who he is, so that you too would worship him and say, Jesus is the Son of God. He has all power and all authority. I will trust him with my eternity, yes, and with today. And with today. And with that relationship. And with that circumstance. And with my past. And with my future. I'll trust him with all of it. Why? Because he's God. And he's good. And he loves you. And he's guiding you through this life. He has authority over those storms. Listen to this. John 14:27, Jesus said, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. Not as the world gives do I give it to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid." Saying, I've got you. I've got you. And listen to this and we'll be done. Revelation 21:1. This is the end of the end. It's when Jesus returns, new heaven, new earth. He says this, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more." It's an awesome passage. I've read it a lot in my life, and I never understood, why does he say, and the sea is no more? Like, what's God saying? Is God saying, and one day, no more bodies of water? Like, I get new heaven and new earth, right? Like, what's he saying? Well, now I understand it. What's he saying? No more rebellion. There's coming a time, our hope in the future, in Christ's kingdom, no more rebellion, no more sin, no more evil, no more chaos. All there will be is peace in the presence of our God. Jesus has promised, if you're a Christian, like, that's our hope, that's our future for all of eternity, but we can experience it right now. And what's the big takeaway? For believers, look to Jesus, walk with Jesus. And for real, if the wind and the waves obey Jesus, so should we. So should we, at his word. And if you're not a believer, this is what's available to you. The peace of God is available to you. He's destroyed our greatest enemy, Satan. He has authority and power over this world. He's going to make a new one. And he did everything to free us from the rebellion of our own sinful flesh. Don't reject him. He has power and authority, and he'll save you.